Do you think it's helpful or unhelpful that at this juncture we don't have a full understanding of what those strategic priorities are? There's nothing within this bill, as it stands, that I can see, unless you're telling me otherwise, which says that GB Energy will do likewise. Is that correct? I don't think you quite clarified how many jobs will actually be within Aberdeen. And if I picked you up correctly, you said you expect those jobs to be operational engineering jobs. Yeah. Could you perhaps elaborate upon that and maybe steer into giving a little bit of clarity as to what you actually expect GB Energy to do in practice? Because the bill, of course, says that the Secretary of State is going to subsequently provide clarity upon that, but there's obviously a lot of discourse in the public domain about what it is it's actually going to do.
Yeah, indeed. So the answer to your first question, you're right, I didn't answer it directly, and the reason is we haven't obviously been able to put a direct number on it yet. It will be in the hundreds. It may eventually be 1,000 or more in the HQ. And of course you will now say, well, that's not going to help manage the energy transition. And the reason for that is that the large numbers of people that we will be helping employ will be in the supply chain. If we just look at some of the numbers already, by the end of the decade there will be 100,000 people employed in offshore wind. I'm hoping that many more of those will be floating offshore wind, and floating offshore wind will be something that will happen very much off the coast of Aberdeen and indeed the whole east coast of the United Kingdom. And so with regards to the jobs will be the sorts of jobs that will work with supply chains and private sectors to determine how are we going to enable floating offshore wind. What is the technology? What are some of the innovation challenges? Project managing those, helping those schemes get through planning permission, making sure those can get onto the grid. So it will be all those sorts of questions. So I very much see the role of Great British Energy as an enabler of getting such new technologies onto the grid, and also as an investor and a co-investor, and obviously that's going to take quite a team of people and skills to achieve that.
Okay, just one more.
Quickie.
So in that context, when do you expect GB Energy to bring down energy bills?
To
bring down energy bills as promised?
Well, look, the only way to get energy bills down, and indeed to get greater energy security, is to get more renewable energy onto the grid. We do have to keep reminding people that the reason why energy bills went up wasn't because of renewable energy, it was because of a global oil and gas price crisis. So therefore, every megawatt, every gigawatt of renewable energy that we will put on the grid will help bring bills and prices down. Now, the exact mechanism by that happens is, of course, a matter of policy, how you decide to bring those bills to the consumer, and that is not the scope of Great British Energy and is not scope of the bill either.
You've spoken very eloquently and rightly about the energy transition, about jobs, about skills, about STEM. But just for clarity, and I've double-checked on the bill there's absolutely no detail within the bill in relation to any of those points. Would that be correct?
So my understanding is that it isn't currently in there.
Okay, exactly.
But however, my understanding is that the statement of strategic priorities is where that would be contained. We do, so there's questions about how much should be added in, and we understand the logic of the bill is to create an enabling vehicle, is to enable GB Energy to act and to do things. So is it useful to put in many different limitations? Probably not. Like adding in too much detail will slow it down and be not. Is it, on the other hand, useful to put in a clause that says as the statement of strategic priorities should have regard for just transition and quality job creation? That could be a consideration specific to it.
But for clarity, that doesn't exist on the face of the bill, anything that's been spoken about in this context. Similarly, just as a point of clarity for myself, is there anything within the bill that gives you certainty that energy bills will be brought down by £300?
So, bringing energy bills down is a complicated process, and it depends on lots of things.
Is it within the bill, though?
Within the bill,
that was my response. How would it be?
Yeah,
How would it be in the bill?
The bill can't. I mean, could the bill say we will cap energy bills at this certain level? That would be it could theoretically, but that would not be part of GB Energy's role to cap it.
I mean, you can't divorce the fact that GB Energy operates in a still privatised energy asset environment, and consequently there are much broader questions about how bills are composed, the energy mix, etc. Now, that is not on the face of the bill, and I'm sure the chair would stop me going down that. But I mean, having been the field official in energy, if anybody wants to talk about that, we can spend hours on it, and the construction of the energy sector. So I understand why the question's asked, but I mean, GB Energy is one entity within a much broader firmament of energy assets owned in different ways.
And does the bill enable the creation of a company which can over time grow to be something like EDF or Ørsted or Vattenfall? EDF brought bills down significantly during the energy crisis when we had soaring bills. Does the bill create the capacity to do that? Yes.
And if I'd answer it, I think the most important, often the focus in energy policy is on retail because it actually affects domestic consumers most tellingly, and obviously then more so on wholesale when the things go in a certain way. The biggest thing, actually, we would say, because we're not necessarily represent engineering and science staff, is actually where's the generation going to come from? What's going down the pipes? What's going down the pipes consistently for the long term, such that we have energy security, we have energy down those lines at a competitive price. And clearly a public sector champion in this regard can be a significant contributor to changing the trajectory of energy prices and giving us indigenous energy security.
If there are no further questions from members...
Time, I'm happy to come back.
Well, I mean, if we're not going to just fill time for the sake of time, if you have a genuine...
But with all due respect, asking a question is not for the sake of time,
okay.
It's just my job.
Right.
Just for full clarity then, yes, you've clarified that it's possible for these things to happen. I don't think anyone would disagree that it's possible for these things to happen. But as it stands, the bill doesn't provide any certainty in relation to any of those points, whether it's...
The question before. I think this is... Carry on.
That's fine, sure.
Okay, there's a minute left, go on.
So again, just for clarity, because you pushed back and said that EDF brought down bills, there's nothing within this bill, as it stands, I can see, unless you're telling me otherwise, which says that GB Energy will do likewise. Is that correct?
I don't think it forces GB Energy to do likewise. I doubt that the legislation that set up EDF also forced EDF to do that. I think the legislation that set up EDF probably set up EDF as a company to operate and to give it freedom to act. And the question is, does this give us, and I would say the question to members here is, what do we do to enable the UK to finally be on par with our peers elsewhere? And does this create a basis for that? Yes. Then, yes, can you please push and hold the government to account?
Order. I'm afraid that brings us to the end of the time allotted.
Do you think it's helpful or unhelpful that at this juncture we don't have a full understanding of what those strategic priorities are, given that the bill is going through in its current form?
I think the more that can be done to set out the strategic priorities, the better. I don't think it necessarily needs to be in the bill, but and the explanatory statement and the introductions, etc., does, I think, give a reasonably good steer on what the strategic priorities are. But it's obviously been set up at pace, and the more clarity there is on what it's going to do, the better. I wouldn't set sort of unreasonable expectations of a bill that's being a body that's being set up kind of really quickly with a pretty clear short-term aim of 2030 power decarbonisation and supporting that. But clearly, in the longer term, it needs the priorities need to be set out.
The only thing I'd add is obviously the NESO will be producing its plan in October. You've then also got the next carbon budget next February. So the actual pathway to 2030 and to 2050 will start to become even clearer in the coming months, but it will need to also be flexible. There will be technologies that emerge that shift our sense of what to focus on. So you need priorities, but you do need quite a lot of flexibility in this system.
Yeah, I made that point, I think at the very beginning, that we need like a very flexible scope, because there will be challenges to the energy transition. We need room to adapt. And if this vehicle is there to like facilitate the energy transition, we need that to be relatively broad. I did mention like a couple of like safeguards. It's more like an accountability, and I think that's still like reasonable to ask. But in terms of like strategic priorities, I think the scope is like broad enough, and that makes sense.